don't think even my dad, my mum, like no one in my like vicinity would have thought to say to me like, oh, why don't you go and see a sports psychologist? Like it was just never even, not even that it was taboo. It was just not in people's like mind to even think to refer someone to a sports psych to do it.
Yeah. I find it interesting how much of the people you work with now and people you hear from or is mentioned online is injuries. Yeah. Injuries is such a big one, and like I'm always surprised by how complex the different issues are that come up, but injuries is...
I find injuries underlines so many things. Yeah. There's so often I have a client, and I'm sure you'll see this as well, a client comes in and they tell you the issue is X problem, it's confidence or it's what. The more you dive into, are we recording now? Cool, all right. We'll just continue this conversation to be fair. But I often, they'll come in with an issue that is like, this is the problem. Yeah. And then you start uncovering more and more issues and you talk to them more and you go, oh, well, your coach told you it was confidence. Yeah. But the more I talk to you, the more I realise that you had an injury 2 years ago and this impacted your confidence or your training, or it's impacted other elements of your life that is that, or other elements of like your performance or anything like that. That's then it's not always confidence that's the problem. Yeah, it's something else. It's so like, but for me, it comes up all the time. All the time that like, and as you said, it's normally something they don't come to you with, and then you just discover later on they've had. Like an ACL rupture, and they're like, oh, I wonder why I'm not as confident as I was 2 years ago. And you go, oh yeah, well, have you ever thought and addressed like the injury that you've been suffering from for the last like year and a half? And no? Okay, well, maybe we can do something about that side.
It's interesting when you hear like someone come to you with a load of different areas and you're having to work out what is the area to focus on.
I always find that difficult. Yeah. When there's like multiple things you think it could be, and like I always think back to I'm sure it was Ian Maynard that gave us the thing of like do you remember the matching hypothesis stuff that he gave us? Do you remember that research? It's people basically were covering somatic and cognitive anxiety, and about matching hypothesis is that you match the solution to what the problem is, the most prominent problem. And everything I always think about it. Whenever I have a client, I always go like, matching hypothesis, does the thing match up? But I also think that's kind of like a psychological skills training way of thinking of like narrow. Yeah, because I always go like, oh well, but then I fall into the PST way of like intervening, and I'm trying to, as you said in your talk earlier, I'm trying to get away from all of that. Right, because we've been recording for a while. Hello and welcome back to the Stoic Athlete podcast. Before we get into everything with my guest today, Oliver Spink, MSc, CPIT, loads of titles we can throw in after that name. We are going to sit and talk today about Ollie's Prof Doc experience, the work he does with some of his clients. We've had a bit of a good chat already, sort of sat and got sort of getting into it. Felt like I should do an introduction as we're just sort of talking, and we started recording anyway. But yeah, anyway, we were talking about matching interventions. Yeah, trying to move away from psychological skills training. It's something I'm massively trying to do. I know you're trying to do that as well, right? I have
to say, I really like when we did the lecture earlier, and you said that we didn't get any kind of exposure to alternative approaches, and that you want to make sure, even at bachelor's level, that they're coming away actually with a range of approaches, because we were just so focused, and I think that is probably an issue maybe with the curriculum everywhere, but it does seem very narrowly focused, and it gives you a fairly inaccurate view of what sports psychology is.
It looks like the work in practice, right? Yeah. I don't know if that's a symptom of working with or being taught by someone, say like Ian, who he's like a godfather of sports psychology. He's been around for ages and he's like retired now. But was it at the beginning, was that a lot of what the approaches were? Was he, and that's what a lot of what he did? Yeah. I do think as a student in studying an MSc in sports psych, or just any field of psychology, I do think you're limited by limited or facilitated, depends which way you want to look at it, but by the lecturer you have. If they're very open to different approaches and they want you to look at they don't care what you do, they just think that it's best to expose you to lots of things. Whereas I think with Ian, he was like, psychological skills training, triangulation, and like gave you everything like that he did. Which isn't inherently wrong, but it gave you a weird starting, or it gives us a weird starting block of like, I think psychological skills training is everything that I should be doing.
And you find it's quite limited in situations, and then when you're a trainee just starting out and you already feel limited, then having like a limited arsenal of weapons to use, you feel like, I can't I think that's where the imposter syndrome definitely comes up, especially when you're starting. And I appreciate that whenever you're starting anything, you're going to get that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do feel like going into the complex world of sports psychology and just having maybe an understanding of sports psychology just being psychological skills training, that's really tough.
Yeah, because then you go, what do I do in this situation? You're limited in your counselling ability, and like people don't think of us as doing therapy, but sometimes it is just therapy. You sit and you will talk, and you're maybe guiding the conversation a little bit, but it's still kind of therapeutic. And on CPAR we had a philosophy workshop, and one of the questions was around like, do we do therapy, or are we like? Because I always call them a session. So I've got a session, right? I'm like, I'm doing therapy today. Right? It doesn't have this. And I think in sport as well, the wording of therapy people take negatively, and look at it as like a mental health thing. Whereas for me, or my view is that we are well-being and performance. We're not so much like mental health specifically, or actually within the remit of what we're qualified to do. Can't work with athletes on diagnosing or treating mental health disorders. But I think mental health or well-being is then the focus, and performance enhancement. When you first started then, just about like imposter syndrome, how do you, as like a young psychologist, so if we've got like some young sports psychologists that we're watching today, how do you overcome initial sort of imposter syndrome? Is it something that you feel you are still sort of experiencing? But two-folded question.
So obviously there is lots of research actually out there on imposter syndrome, but if I say from like my own personal experience, I was working with a client. I spoke about this in the session earlier. It was a tough client, but it was going really well. And that was more so through talking and being a person. And this was very early on when I was on CPAR. And for me, I was so determined to make it a formal intervention that I almost interrupted our progress we were doing, which was effectively therapy, and to make a formal psychological skills intervention. And it was just completely the wrong person, wrong intervention to choose in that moment. So for me, I know it didn't feel right, because from my own experience, and I'm sure we'll go into that in a little bit, but psychological skills wouldn't have been enough just for me. So I actually went away and I got in contact with a sports psych in Ipswich, and he basically opened my eyes up to alternative
Can I ask who that was?
approaches.
Is it Jack Mitchell?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, okay.
No,
Sports like such a small world.
I know.
I was like, it might be like.
Well, Ipswich is even.
He was working at Ipswich as well, and I was like, maybe it's the same guy.
No, I'll tell you after. But to me, it like opened up the idea that sports psychology is something else, and by opening it up, I found more approaches that were closer to what I value as a person. So what I was now teaching was in line with my philosophy, actually what I thought sports psychology was, what I wanted to deliver as a person. And I think because I was working more closely to who I was as a person, the imposter syndrome went away a little bit because it's a little bit more in line.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you don't get the imposter syndrome still, because you're a trainee and you are learning throughout, and you'll learn after your trainee title goes away. So I think it is just accepting that you're in an uncomfortable spot, and growth happens during those uncomfortable moments. Like even today, lecturing in front of a class, that's not...
Is that the first time you've like gone and
done a
proper
lecture? Yeah. And for me, like, that wouldn't be something that I'd always say yes to.
Yeah.
But I knew it was a good opportunity, and I knew it was good for me. Yeah, it was nice to see you again.
You also wanted a trip to Wembley, let's not lie.
That was unbelievable. You'd have to put the photos you took in.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get those photos on, because I think that's one of the big things with here, is that, you know, trying to get you in.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can tell you we're at Wembley. That might do a little something and get you down. But I think confidence in things often comes from, I say this a lot, is like confidence comes from competence. They're like, how can you expect to be confident to go and do a lecture if you've never done a lecture before? Yeah. Well, for me, it only comes from, well, the first time I go and do it, I'm not going to be confident. The next 10 times I do it, I'm probably going to get more and more confident. And by the time I've done, for me now, I've probably done over 100 lectures. Yeah. Well, now, when I step up to do a lecture, it's like tying my laces. I don't think about it. You just step up and you do it. And
tell by the way you were sitting there.
I've made all these slides. I know what I'm talking about. Like, I know that I'm good at riffing and like going off on tangents, and I really like. I'm of the opinion that teaching, you should also be doing. You should be doing, especially in sports, like you should be doing it as well and teaching what you're doing. I like I sound like Donald Trump. I was about to say the weave, but the weave is it's what Donald Trump says, and I don't want to be Trump.
Okay.
But the weave, or like the weaving in stories of like personal experience of. Well, here's the research. But there's a big research practice gap in psychology that. Well, I remember trying to sell a workshop, which was like a 5-hour workshop to clubs.
Oh, really?
And I was like, read it in a book, and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And then I found out that no club has 5 hours or 120 quid to spend. And to me, like 120 quid wasn't a lot of money for like the 5 hours of time I was given. So I was like, well, of course they're not going to be able to, but like they're not going to be able to do that. And then all the mistakes I've made, I then just like relay that to the students. I'm like, I've been an idiot in this way, in this way, in this way. Don't make the same mistakes as me. But like back to the point of, I think that you only get confident through doing it. And I think it's the same of being a sports psych at the beginning. And like, we're both still in training. But right at the beginning, like, I feel like I'm like 3-4 years. I'm like, I've not done my midpoint yet because of like I've deferred due to personal circumstances, but like I feel like I'm at a 3-4 years experience. I've got like 3 years experience but I'm at a midpoint. It's a really weird position to be in. I feel like I've got more experience than I am in terms of the stages of qualification. But like right at the beginning, I do, because you never get the chance to do it. You can't do it until you leave your masters and go on to training, right?
I know.
So then you're like, you do make so many mistakes at the beginning. And going back to what you said before about when you worked with the client and you jumped in with like a psychological skills training intervention, I think part of that comes from, because I did the same thing, and I remember, I can think of multiple sessions, but it came from the imposter syndrome stuff. But it came from then that imposter syndrome leading to me feeling like I have to prove myself. Like, well, just sitting and talking, and that's not good enough. That they want something to take away with them from the session. So I need to give them something like a quick reward, or something that's going to help them quickly. Otherwise, like, they're going to think I'm shit and I'm crap, and I can't, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they might be right. They might be right at this point. I don't know what I'm doing. But like, I'm learning, I'm getting better. And sometimes you do just have to lean into, like you said, like the uncomfortable bit of just holding the conversation. And I now like feel like the thing for me before anything else is relationships. I agree. If I build a really good relationship with my client first, even if do you know what? Even if the intervention I did was actually really bad, it would actually probably still get a good outcome. Even if I hadn't done and I'm not saying I do bad interventions or provide bad service, but I feel like if the relationship was there, and this is where I think a lot of like mental skills coaches or still get probably quite good results because they're probably really good at building relationships, and that serves as a foundation, and then the person just buys into what they're telling them, and they do it and they feel like it's working. So yeah, I do think that there's a lot in sports psychology for me, in club work and one-to-one work, that feel often like you need to. I'm getting rid of the feeling gradually. Of feeling like you have to prove yourself. Because there's a lot of intangibles in sports. Like I can't measure someone's confidence exactly. They are exactly a 0.56, and I've worked with them, and now they're a 1.2, and I can't do that. Whereas with performance analysis, you could show that someone's run 3 kilometers in this game, and in the other game they've run 5 kilometers, and see that like there's more like clear data and numbers, and sports psych can be really hard to demonstrate what we've done without like having like I don't know.
I know what you mean. Like so even
skills have given to you, and
a lot of what you do is going to be the reward is something immeasurable. It's usually, hopefully, an improvement for the client. Hopefully, it's a positive feeling for you. But a lot of the time, you're not going to get the numbers to prove it. But you know, I think deep down, even if it's just between you and the client, you and a small group, they recognise and you recognise
that
the impact.
Something's changed. Yeah, I think so. It's an interesting career. I think there's certain people are drawn to it. I think you because you have to. It's a weird combination of things. And I was going to say something earlier about like, is it about understanding yourself and your values, or is it about playing to your strengths as a practitioner? Because I used to believe a lot in the value stuff, and I've gradually, I think, gone more leaning into more optimizing and emphasizing what my strengths are. Because, and that goes to the relationship point I made, of I think the core aspect of the relationship, or the core aspect of like the positive outcome, key factor maybe, is the relationship with the client. And I think my greatest strength is being able to build a relationship with the client. So like, if I can really focus on, okay, the way I communicate, my body language, the tone of my voice when I say things, and the things I'm already really good at, which is making relationships, communication, and I'd say interpersonal, without trying to blow my drum and be really arrogant. But that's something I feel like I'm pretty good at. If I can just make that even better, then all the other stuff will sort of come with it, because I have the knowledge, I have the skills, like I've done this and I've studied, but rather than worrying about like the delivery of my service so much that I then deliver poorly, I was like, well, just think, because it's even though from our perspective we are still like, it's like a performance on our side of performing good therapy. It sounds really strange, but we're still like optimizing our own performance in our career. So then I'm like, if I lean into my strengths even more, I can get more out of it, and then bring in the knowledge later on. And I was keep trying to move away from like, I need to prove myself, I need to prove myself, I need to prove myself. And then now I sort of let it, the more I've relaxed and taken a step back, the more I've realised that I'm better at what I do. The more I stress about it, the worse I feel I am. So it's this strange, because you feel like you need to worry to get better. But for me, if I relax more, I seem to be getting better in my delivery.
Would you not say that when you're saying playing to your strengths rather than necessarily your values, would you not say that, because I obviously spent a bit of time with you, would you not say that one of your values would be connection and just relationship building in general? Because to me, it screams out as both a value and a strength.
There's probably overlap. So I wouldn't. I'm not completely dismissing the idea of like being driven by values, because I still do believe in that quite a lot. I do think that factors into like humanistic counselling as well, like
Yeah.
believing a lot in your values or trusting a lot in your values. But I've gradually moved towards more of like a positive psychology outlook on life in general. And I think that values are important, but from a performance perspective on like anything, I'm trying to lean more into strengths-based approach. And then what I mean by like leaning more into it is actually attending time to getting better at those things. Whereas before I would put a lot of focus on what I felt were like my weaknesses. I didn't feel like I was very good at, I really felt like I really wasn't good at counselling skills. And then I realised that I naturally do a lot of them anyway. If I just optimise the things I already do well, I then have got pretty good counselling skills there, just under the surface that I've not brought up to the surface. Or I felt like my intervention design or case formulations weren't very good. But okay, if I can just not worry about that so much, find a good method of case formulation and use my interpersonal skills to optimise that case. So now I use like a 5 Ps model. And we just sit and I used to find it really hard I would go away from sessions and then write case formulations. And I still do, like I still go and reflect on them. But I now sit in a session and we have a whiteboard and we draw out the 5 Ps on a board and then we fill it all in together so that they are involved in the process of doing it. So I'm like, rather than worrying about my need to like get a case formulation done, I'm using my skill, like strength of like communication to then just get the client to do it with me, and then they are involved in the process, so they understand what's going. Like, does that make sense?
It does, no, it's a good point.
So I'm using them both together, rather than. I do agree with you that like building connection and relationships is probably a strong value of mine. I think authenticity is then also good, but then that again leads into like if I'm more, I then have to be more authentically myself. And then that's so I'm just like the values then are propping up my. It's a good point. It's a good point actually, because now you're making me like think. Do I actually know what I'm talking about? Like, maybe not. Well, maybe it's both.
I was going to say, even if they're not distinct, they're definitely being supported by one another, and that is me.
Definitely related.
And that is me almost guessing your values, but I'd say from spending enough time with you, those values to me would strike up in at least a top 5 to 7. I'll be very surprised if, say, connection and relationship.
If they weren't in the top 5.
I would definitely reassess how well I knew you. If they weren't in your, say, top 7.
If I was saying like alone time is like one of my top, you'd be going
being quiet.
This guy is chatting so much shit. It's not accurate at all. But yeah, I do think I think the thing of starting out is so. I think it's really exciting for people that like. If you guys are looking at going on the camera's not on me, but if you're looking to go on to like do sports psychology in the future, then genuinely I think it's so important to learn like a lot of these lessons and listen to other sports psychologists speak and go and message people and talk to them, because like the stuff we're talking, it's the issues that everyone has faced, right? They're not isolated just to like me and you sat in this room. Like, every other sports psych you've spoken to, the same thing, right? Everyone's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I
don't think we've even broken the surface of mistakes and learning moments as a trainee. And there's going to be, I won't say hundreds, there's going to be plenty more, and they're going to carry on even when you drop the in-training title.
When you're qualified, you're still going to make mistakes.
It's what you teach to your athletes, right? It's accepting mistakes. And using them as an opportunity to learn, to grow more resilient, to grow more competent.
Sure.
We would be, it'd be silly for us to not think that we'll ever make a mistake or.
Well, that's like quite a good segue actually, because you've had quite an interesting route into sports psychology, right? So, to give some context, like me and Ollie did our master's degrees together back in 2020. COVID year, which is such a weird thing to think about now, that we're now like 27 and we're meant to be adults. We're talking about this on the way in. I'm not sure if we are. But like we did our masters together, and I like basically went immediately on to go and do CPAR, and I've deferred, and we're still trainees. But I remember talking to you at one point, and you were asking me about whether to do CPAR or not.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember being like, yeah, go and do it. And I was like, I'm the worst person, because anyone asks me to do, if they should do it, I'm like, yeah, go and do it straight away.
Yeah.
But I was really encouraging you to do it, because I think that there's a lot of characteristics about you that feed well into being a sports psychologist.
Yeah.
Like the thing about building relationships, I think that relates well to you as well.
Yeah.
But you've had quite an interesting route. So you started CPAR.
Yeah.
And then, like, do you want to take over, and like you can sort of talk about your route into the sports side?
Do you want me to go back to the start?
You can go back as far as you want, Ollie.
I do think it does all connect quite nicely. So, as I presented earlier, growing up from a small town called Felixstowe. Absolutely.
Put some context to it, yeah.
Seaside town, lovely.
What's Felixstowe's biggest export or best export?
Best export?
I know that there's one person from Felixstowe that stands out to me. I'm sure he's from Felixstowe.
Oh, Arnold Allen?
Arnold Allen, big Arnold Allen, yeah.
So you're talking about Felixstowe and you're saying exports. I'm thinking about the docks. I was about to say cars.
No, I mean like the person.
Steel?
Yeah, no, fair point, fair point.
No, he absolutely is.
Yeah, and then, absolute legend.
So yeah, I grew up small town, played as a goalkeeper for my local club, played as a goalkeeper throughout. The team were okay.
Absolute cat in the goal.
We weren't winning leagues. We were a top division club, and I stayed at that same sort of club roughly until from 5 years old, my first introduction to football, until I turned 14, I believe. And then I had a small bit of time at another step up called Woodbridge Town Alliance. For me, that was a huge step up, and again, that was
EJA stuff. Is that?
I believe so. Yeah, that was some of my favourite times playing football altogether. And then I got the opportunity to trial and then sign for Ipswich. And for me, it was a tough experience because one, I'm joining quite late on, so I'm about 14. The scholarship sort of decision is in year 16, so I'm in 2 really important years effectively. I'm a goalkeeper, so I train separately. I'm a trialist, so I don't even wear the same kit. And I just didn't really know how to settle into a new environment. You know, 14 years old, I'm with players, exceptional players, like the most unbelievable players I've ever seen live. Some of them, they're unbelievable. And I was sort of coming into that environment on the back foot. I remember at Woodbridge, a lot of the way I sort of socialised with that new group and settled in was because I was playing pretty well. And that sort of allowed a bit more communication, a bit more become welcoming.
I think sports, particularly football, is very much like like relationships are often built off of people playing well. It's a performance-based culture. If you're playing well, people love you. If you're not, if you're a bit shit, people don't like you. It's very easy.
Well, the latter was my side. So when I was at Ipswich, I struggled to find my feet. I just wasn't at that level yet. Like I remember in training. And bear in mind, I don't know, is this 2013, 14, I guess. I go one of the first training sessions with the team. I get the ball to take a goal kick. I put it down on the right-hand side just to look to go and boot it along. And they're like, no, put it in the middle and then we'll look to play out. And that's how behind I was. Like I didn't even know.
That was an option. That was something you could do,
I'd never done that with my local club. And it was, and that, you know, that sort of, to me, illustrates where I was at. And I was with the goalkeepers, perfect, lovely, supportive environment for me. It was a goalkeepers union. It really was, and I know it's cliche, but it is true.
You all stick together, you honestly.
You know, I loved it. I loved it with the goalkeepers, and then I'd go and train with the whole team and the players. And it just didn't click. Like the performances weren't as good. I wasn't as happy. I'm sure they weren't as happy with me, especially being a keeper, not in the best form. But basically my confidence dropped. Because of performances, not feeling too settled. My anxiety went up, and then that ultimately leads to worse, you know, prolonged poor performances, and also just less enjoyment. I remember you're training 5 times a week, and I just wasn't enjoying it as much. The experience is amazing. I was born 20 minutes down the road. I'm now playing for my local club. It is unbelievable, and it just wasn't. Like I was saying earlier, it just didn't feel too authentic, just because something wasn't right. And I was ultimately released from the academy. I had, I think I had a training session on the day I was released, and I remember just being all over the place. And I left that session, literally cried in the car to my mum driving home, and I decided I'm never going to play football again. And 2 hours later, I then watched the first team play, because I had a season ticket at Ipswich. So that's salt in the wounds. I had to go off and watch them, but and I didn't tell anyone at the time.
You didn't have to go and watch them, did you?
No,
or was it really obvious if you didn't go?
I guess so, yeah. And I remember I didn't tell anyone. I just sat there looking at the goalkeeper in goal, thinking,
that could have been me.
Yeah, and for me, I didn't play. I never played football again. I had a few spells, but it was not anything concrete.
But the enjoyment had gone.
The enjoyment had gone, and I just had this kind of scarring from it that made me not want to play. And my plan was, if I wasn't to make it at Ipswich, I wasn't putting all my eggs in the basket of making it at Ipswich or being a professional football player. But I thought, this is really good to have on my CV to then go out to America. Do a sports scholarship like my brother sort of started and was going to do. And I thought, perfect, that's what I want to do. I've always wanted to live and move to America. And because of that kind of rough latter experience at Ipswich, I stopped altogether. I must have been 16, 10 days after my birthday, actually, I remember it.
Wow.
And I just stopped playing altogether. And it was only 2 years later, I sat with my mum, and we were looking at university courses for my bachelor's, so for my undergrad. And we were like, well, you like PE, you're interested in sport, it's still your world, and you like psychology, you like people, you like interaction, you like the uniqueness of people. Pair those together, you get a sports psychologist. And that's really, I know we said about this earlier, that I covered sports psychology modules at A-level. I never really put it together that you could be a sports psychologist. And that was the perfect role for me. So I remember doing my bachelor's, and I went around, saw some universities, and I was just desperate to get that, even that sports psychologist in training, to get that title. I kind of set out and knew that I was going to do my bachelor's, I was going to do my master's, and then I will do that next stage. Because for me, my whole aim has been it's changed. So at first it was to make sure that everyone, or no athlete, falls short of their athletic dreams due to a lack of psychological support. And now my hope is just that psychological support and sports psychology is more well known in the first place, because
so the more general awareness of it.
You know where to turn. Because for me, when I was struggling at Ipswich, I didn't know what a sports psychologist was. My parents didn't, or no one pointed it out. My family didn't, family friends didn't, and friends didn't. And the club had a sports psychologist, but I didn't particularly see them often when I was there. And I guess that's the sign of the times.
It definitely is,
And so now it's to make sure that if, a family friend, if I speak somewhere and I have 30 players and maybe some parents there, that when I'm talking, that even if it's not anyone in that room that needs the support, when a family friend is then struggling with confidence, anxiety, sports not becoming not being enjoyable anymore, that parent from the last presentation workshop has heard and knows to recommend.
It's that wider network of people that they can spread the awareness of it.
I just feel as though everyone does deserve psychological support. And sports are many people's dreams, and why would you not? You deserve everything you need to make that dream capable, and especially when it's psychological support. Yeah,
definitely. Like having that, just having it available to you. That doesn't mean you have to use it. But it just means it's another. I think you said earlier about another weapon in the arsenal, or another tool in your toolbox that. Well, I know I have this at my disposal if I need it, and I can use it. And enjoyment, I don't think gets talked about enough. No. There's always a thing of people. I remember when we were younger, that people would talk about Asuakoto and be like, oh, well, he hates football and he's earning loads of money. And I'm like, yeah, but it's the same thing of like people that work their jobs and they hate them anyway. Like, do you want to stay in that forever? Probably not. You want to go off and do something else.
You want to enjoy what you're doing.
You want to enjoy what you're doing, and that's like ultimately why you stopped playing. And I think that happens to a lot of kids that get released from academies. Is that they get released, they don't enjoy football anymore because they're burnt out. They've been playing football since they were 5 in an academy, and now they're 11 years later.
Yeah, it's a job.
Yeah, it's a job, and they're 16, so they've not even had it as a proper job yet. But it's still like a job to them. Yeah. And they don't know what to do next, and they the percentage of people that don't actually play after being released from academies is staggering. It's ridiculous. I do think that a lot of that goes down to like, you got to give a lot of credit to clubs like Crystal Palace have put in like a different system. It's a shame it has to come off on the back of like young boys committing suicide being released. It's great that it's there. It's a shame it's had to come out of such like unfortunate circumstances. But I think that highlights even more of like the need for psychological support in football academies for young athletes in general. Because I think the enjoyment thing, and I used to do a lot of work on values and stuff in sessions. I mean, there used to be a big focus on my sessions. And one that everyone would always forget to put on there was like actually enjoying themselves and enjoyment. And I always said like, we'll leave the last one empty because I have a suggestion for you. And it would always be enjoyment. And we do like a scaling thing of like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much are you enjoying yourself at the moment in your sport? And it would be like, quite often it would be like a 3 or 4. And then you'd look round the thing of values and it'd be like, well, it's mainly because of like these other values are really low as well. So if you like get them up, and then the enjoyment will go up. Or I just find it really difficult to see someone not enjoying their sport. And that's the thing, is like, it's where like as a practitioner you're trying to like not be too caring or like not be too empathetic with them, but you have to be good at your job. I find it really tough to see, especially a young athlete who like you've maybe talked to the coach and the coach is like singing their praises, but they're having a really tough time and they're not enjoying the sport. Like, that's something that I always find difficult. But I think you're right that with there needs to be not just the actual presence of it, but the awareness. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of us around now. A lot of sports psychs around. Sports psychs in training. In our case, I have to keep saying that. I know. I said sports psych in training, but there's not always the awareness that is there. So like, I can't tell you the number of clients that have called me up and been like, "What do you do? Like, what do you actually do?" And then I've had to like adapt my website to be like, well, these are the things I can help you with. And even then on the website, I just give buzzwords, motivation, confidence, resilience. Like, we will work on those things in the sessions, but I can't tell you exactly what we would do because it's different from every single person I work with. It's a very difficult thing. Like, the awareness of it is, I think it's getting there more and more. But I think sometimes there's still the grey area of thinking of us as like a clinical psychologist. Well,
even when I was saying about my experience earlier, so when I said, you know, I didn't know, my parents didn't know, my family didn't know, ultimately I didn't know. I'm the one suffering with low confidence and high anxiety and not enjoying it. And there was, even if I didn't necessarily, I remember listening to the sports psychologist speak and I found it really interesting. I thought this would be something I wanted to do. I didn't then take the next steps to make that happen, and that definitely needs to be easier for it. Just how easy it is, one, to be known, and also for it to actually happen. But even for me, you know, I thought it was interesting. I didn't think it would save, not necessarily save, but have a really big impact on my own performance. And you know, for me, I'm an academy. I could have had it for free. There was absolutely no blocks.
There's other context. There's other things that go into it, though, I'd say, because when you're 14, 15, 16, your brain's not even fully developed. Like, especially for a boy. Like, my brain's probably not even developed now. Like, I'm such an idiot. But like, your brains don't develop until, was it 25? And your prefrontal cortex finally finishes developing. So like, you're 16. And your brain's not fully there. You're so influenced by the environment and the boys around you and the connections. And there's you're in the midst of puberty, and I know these things all sound like silly to say, but like not developed brain, puberty, high stress environment of like being evaluated all the time, lack of connection in the group. Well, like, yeah, to be fair, you'd understand why like you maybe face some problems, and that if you had a psychologist at that time that could come in and just even give you just space to vent and go, this situation's really shit and frustrating, and I don't know what I can do, but I've always wanted to play for Ipswich, and I'm not enjoying it, and I thought I'd get here and I would enjoy it, and just give you the space to speak about it.
It was that typical sort of area that comes up when you work with clients now. I would have been a perfect client to be working with. It was just, I can't get the performances to click. Like, I can do it in one environment, and then even later on, I'd start to play. I think they were trialing new goalkeepers in the team. Fair enough, absolutely fair. So that I was like being dropped down, also just to allow me to play without the pressure, and I played really well. The standards, I believe it's just as good. You know, some players I was playing with now have gone on with careers all across football in Premier League, Championship, and for some reason that environment was okay for me. And I don't know, it's interesting. Goalkeeper's fine, year group below fine. My age group, it was almost just like I got off to such a bad start. I just couldn't make things click again afterwards. And I think that's what a lot of people want you to do. They want you to make it click again.
And that's so difficult once it goes. Like, and especially, that's where like, it's probably an organisational issue with Ipswich at the time, of like how you were brought into the team, or there's lots of things that could have happened that could have led to that. And I think it's really interesting because every sports psychologist in training, or sports psychologist, I have to keep prefacing it. BPS if you're watching, I did it. Bases too, cases. Every sports psychologist has their own journey. There's always, anyone I've spoken to has always had this moment that's probably pushed them into this field. Mine is like having an injury really gave me a push. I knew when I was younger I wanted to do it, but the injury gave me like a big old push.
That'll do it.
That'll do it. And I know, like, I used to get the piss taken out of me, like, when we were studying for our masters, because I would bring it up all the time. But it was a big thing for me, and it had a massive impact on my life and the direction and the trajectory that I wanted to go. But the same for you is that, like, that experience has then pushed you towards this career. And then now, like, so CPAR and doing Prof Doc. Like,
I can go through
it's
those.
so interesting. If you'd have never had that experience, would you be doing what you do now?
Probably not.
Maybe not.
Probably not. That was the first time I realised, because my ability-wise, if I wasn't at the top, I was still good. I was still a good goalkeeper. You don't really lose that too quickly. But it was something in my head that wasn't clicking. And it made me, that fueled my bachelor's. Actually, the motivation to find out for me why things weren't clicking. What was it about my brain at that time that wasn't quite connecting with my hands or my feet, or almost my heart, really, because if I didn't love it that much. And I don't know, it's really, that was huge for me. And that was all of that experience, there would have been really high, there were tons of highs, and it was a huge experience for me. There are obviously low points as well, which maybe peak their head into your eye line, but that is what's put me on this path to do what I do now. And that's why it's so much more meaningful. And I'm sure you can agree that the sports psychology route is a long, tough,
but rewarding route.
Definitely
rewarding.
Like us getting to LA, it is so rewarding, and some of my best, most meaningful moments from all of my training haven't been working with the highest athletes or making a lot of money. It's actually just been helping people who need help.
Yeah.
And
when you see you've made a difference for someone, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
I did something good there.
Yeah.
And it's like not selfish.
Yeah.
It's not a selfish reward of like, oh, I'm really good at what I do. It's like, oh, no, actually, it was really nice to see like something clicked for them, and like they found relief from that little snippet of conversation or what, like the rewarding, that like intrinsic feeling of like you've done something good rather than like the extrinsic. My belly is rumbling. It's so hungry.
Got a sandwich.
Yeah, I was trying to eat soon. But that also leads in well. So like, well, what are you doing now?
Okay.
What's Oliver Spink's day-to-day life looking like?
Well, I know you want me to talk a little bit about CPAR too, so
you can do. It's up to you. You can cover it if you want to.
Or we'll do the Prof Doc, because I think Portsmouth deserves its credit. I really do.
But to be fair, the brief of CPAR is basically you started it, and then you stopped it, and you chose something else that aligned more with you.
It kind of goes. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So we graduated in 2020. Lockdown or COVID happened. There was no organised sport. There was no regular timeline for sport coming back.
I had a garage with a gym in it, and I just got absolutely jacked.
Really?
Yeah, I lost loads of weight. I was in great shape, honestly. And then it came to the end of lockdown, and I met my girlfriend, and then I put on the boyfriend weight and just stopped gymming. And then these things happen.
Look down the camera and blame her, mate.
I'm not, Carolyn, if you're watching, I'm not blaming you. I love you very much, and I apologise for everything I said.
But it was a weird time, wasn't it? Because that would have been the time when I was messaging you to be like, do I start CPAR? Do I actually follow this route? Because I had to get a job down at the shipping company in Felixstowe because there was no timeline for sport coming back. Masters is over.
Work.
You need to do something. And I was working in a job that was okay. It wasn't really what I wanted to do, and it was getting quite serious to this might need to be a career. And that's when I made the decision, no, I'm going to stick to what I've sort of dedicated 4 years of education to, and really what I feel like my purpose is.
Yeah.
And I decided to start CPAR. For me, it's a really good opportunity to be a sports psychologist in training. It was nice to have your own practice, you make a little bit of money, and it's a really good head start. And for me, it was a really positive, it was that breakthrough time where you finally sit down with a client and do one-to-one after 4 years of theory. And it's like,
you realise you don't know shit.
Yeah, but you have that moment where you sit down, and that's pretty cool. And then so CPAR was really good. It just didn't really fit for me. I was still in the same place. Like I said, I was admitted onto the course. Felt like fireworks were going off. Everything sort of just stayed the same, and it wasn't really what I needed to get out of that identity from COVID.
Yeah.
So I thought, I need something new, I need a new environment. So I got on a call with Chris Wagstaff, my supervisor, and I really liked everything that he said, everything about the course. I thought, I'm just going to go for it.
He really sold it to you. Like,
he sold it to me literally by being human.
Yeah.
Like if it was a salesy pitch, it wouldn't have stuck. But it's almost that kind of that nice tone and relationship and support that I needed even when I was at Ipswich. That kind of person that, you know, because you are in a vulnerable position being a trainer. You are learning. You're going to make mistakes, and he was just perfect for that. So I decided I'm going to go for it. I enrolled. I think I've been on the course for about 3 years, and I really enjoy it. The supervision, the weekly supervision for me, and maybe we do a separate podcast about Prof Doc versus any others another time. But for me, the regular supervision, I have my practice supervisor Amanda, and my research Chris, and then I have Ale in America as well, and the cohort's really lovely, nice small group. But everyone's on the same mission. Like, everyone is dedicated, like I say, a fairly difficult. They've dedicated their life and their time into a fairly difficult pathway.
Yeah.
That isn't always as rewarding as other pathways.
Yeah.
But everyone there has, and they all want to take it to sports psychologist, to the doctorate title. Yeah. And for me, that's a really lovely environment to grow in. And that environment, from the people to supervisors, is an environment that helps get a good value out of me. So I've really enjoyed it.
I think it's the thing of, and I know I said this earlier when you spoke to the students, but it sounds a lot like that the relationships, the community aspect of that, and like because the regular check-ins and having a more structured like taught units and a lot of that sounds like it was something that you needed to, you knew you wanted to do this, but it's something that not that you necessarily needed, but having that helps you way more than not having it. Like that facilitates your development so much more than if you were doing, say, like CPAR, like I'm doing, where you're very isolated all the time. You're trying to find your own clients, especially at the beginning, and the opportunities aren't coming your way. And then although I've got my supervisor I speak to, I'll speak to twice a month, a couple of times a month or more. That weekly thing allows you to, really, like, I'm not getting any clients. Like, what am I meant to, and especially that first year where, like, I think my first year I had like 2 clients or 3 clients and like maybe a workshop, and like I did like nothing. And it's completely different, and then you're so self-conscious about that. And then like to have that someone to vent to or just to speak to, and then them give you advice is like, well, that must be really, I can see how that would be really beneficial. Like really beneficial for you. Is almost 3:25.
Okay.
It's going to take us an hour to get across London. And I'm aware you said about your train timings. Yeah,
I'm probably going to miss that regardless. Don't worry about
that. Right. I was going to just drop you some sort of quick fire questions.
Okay.
I feel like I'm a nightmare.
I might struggle to answer these quick, and you might struggle to deliver them quick.
I feel like I'm a nightmare because I am very chatty, and we have so many things we could have spoken about today, and we've got through a lot of stuff. I'd love to have you come back on again at some point, because this is great. If you were going to go back to Ollie of 2020 before CPAR, you can either do before CPAR or like as you're starting your prof doc, what's like one big sort of key piece of advice you'd go back and like say to yourself?
So this is when I've started CPAR or the prof doc?
Either CPAR or your prof doc. Like going back to your younger self before you're like on training, what's one piece of advice you'd go back and give yourself?
For me, 100%, and this is heavily taught at Portsmouth at least, but it is just to reflect on your values, your journey and your story, and obviously you want that to sort of conduct maybe your philosophy as you practice, but also just what that does for you as a person.
And the self-awareness, the understanding of yourself. Yeah.
You know, if we were 25 when we started, that's 25 years of life that has gone in a certain direction for whatever reason, and that's usually likely sort of being guided by things you like, things you're good at, things you love. And for me,
just as an autopilot doing these things.
Find out what it is that actually makes those 25 years enjoyable, or find out what it is that made you. I love the question of what made you first fall in love with your sport, because people aren't doing sport unless you first have a love for it, because no one starts sport particularly well. You have to keep going back and trying, and I think it's informed from loving it at the start. So for me, it'd be to get in touch or reflect on your values and your story.
Cool. So reflect on your values, reflect on your story, and then have that understanding to guide you as you go through the stages. If you're working with a client, what's like one key way you would, or one that's like a key question or a key like activity that they could go and do to start to build if they were maybe struggling with confidence? What's one thing you would suggest they go and do to try and start building up their confidence again?
I think it relates back to the previous answer for me. It is to reflect, or maybe even just explore your values for the first time. Lots of people don't know their values, which is fine, but it's always good to learn them. But for me, it would be, I like exploring the values, the story, writing a letter to your younger self.
Nice, yeah.
I think confidence should be, I don't know, it should be, I don't know, what am I trying to say? It should be informed by who you are as a person. And I think who you are as a person is, you find out who you are as a person through your values.
Yeah.
So for me, I like reflecting on the whole story, especially when people first come to you and they're really focused on, in the last year I've been rubbish at this and this and this. I'll listen to it and then ask them almost to zoom out. And at first I feel as though there can be this slight thought of, well, I kind of want to talk about the problem, but then when you zoom out and then you talk about things that they are good at, things that are important to them, things that, like I say, made them fall in love with their sport, that's a much nicer way to, you know, to fall back on those moments, maybe accomplishments that you've made, but mainly like what you love. As I find that as a good way to get it back in touch with your confidence, because it's closer to the core of who you are.
Yeah, I think that leans into the conversation we had before about the link between like sort of the confidence, the values and the strengths.
Yeah,
Is that like, well, yeah, looking at the values, looking at the things I've done well and why I did them well, like that's going to help me to become sort of more confident.
Yeah.
From your experience so far, what's one of the most common issues that athletes will come to you with, or that you find when working with athletes, and how do you often work to reconcile that or to help the athlete move forwards?
Good question. I was thinking, we spoke a little bit about injuries earlier, and I do think there is usually some kind of link that goes back to injuries. But I find a lot of people, it sounds almost small, but a lot of it is just focused on things that are out of their control, or, yeah, you know, just kind of, they'll display a load of things that are going on, and they're all valid, but I then think just shifting it actually to what is in your control versus what's out of your control has actually been fairly effective. And because just, I don't know, it's a good question. I don't know necessarily what the most common is, but I do think lots of the time when people are talking, they are talking about things that are out of their control.
Yeah.
And like I say, I like to talk about things that are value driven by the person and ultimately in their control. So that's I guess how I would rectify that issue. Have
you come across the stuff like premeditation of evils, which is like an REBT? It's REBT and Stoic sort of concept thing, but it's essentially sitting down and writing out all the things that could go wrong. Like basically just pre-planning, catastrophizing. So every single thing that might go wrong with a situation. Or you could do it about all the challenges that I might face. And then you basically just action plan. And you just go through and you go, well, if this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do this. If this happens, I do this. And you're moving away, and it's the controllables thing of these challenges, for the most part, are outside of my control. But all these plans are all the things I can do. So I did this with a client yesterday where we worked through and figured out a plan of like what they would do before a match. And like these are the things these are the challenges that they would face before the match, and then this is how we are going to rectify them. And we're going to chuck in some psychological skills training in there, and we're going to chuck in some anti-orphalizing stuff from REBT, which goes into the routine. And but ultimately, it was just as simple as like control the controllables
Yeah.
with a little sprinkle of like additional REBT and like CBT stuff. Like it's that to me works really well. Is the when you like the control, like doing that little premeditation of evils works really well.
I think just through all of our education, and I know it sounds really simple, control versus uncontrollable.
It was a big Ian Maynard thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess so actually. But it just, to me, when I hear people talk about it, it just screams out in my head straight away.
Yeah.
I think that's so instilled in the way that I think that you can just tell.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I have to wrap up soon.
That's okay. Yeah, to me they scream out, and for me they're nice ones just to nudge back into place and maybe rectify thoughts.
Cool. Last question.
Okay, you're going for another one.
Go one more.
Good company.
I find this question really is on the Jackmate podcast. You ever listen to the Jackmate podcast? Yeah. What's the last question?
I'm worried.
Do you know what the last question is they ask their guests?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
They always ask, "What's the meaning of life?"
You know, I heard this the other day, and I was like, "Thank God no one's ever asked me that question." The meaning of life. I don't know. I don't really know. I think, like we were saying earlier, with mistakes, I think it is just a roller coaster of lessons. There's never periods where everything's up.
Yeah.
It is just up and down. It's learning from your mistakes, maybe making them again, but then learning from that mistake, and just slowly progressing and growing. And I do think. So
it's like enjoying the process, enjoying the journey. I know people say that a lot, but like it is sort of.
And you won't enjoy it all, but if you can try and enjoy and learn, then enjoy, learn and grow, I guess.
Cool.
then I would say that's probably a rough idea. But I personally don't know. But I'd be interested to know what you think.
Oh, God. That's the episode, guys. What do I think is the meaning of life? I think to find joy in the small wins and be grateful for the things you do have and the experiences that you've had. I think that's something for me that's been really important is gratitude, and I think it's overplayed now. People associate gratitude with like woo-woo-y people that like do yoga and shout at mountains because they want to express their emotions. But I do think gratitude is really important. For me, just living day by day, trying to do better than the day before, probably is like the way. And I would also say now, like, I don't really talk about it very often, but like I lost my dad like 2 years ago, and my now meaning of life is to live how he lived. He was like, for me, it's about people and relationships and really get. And I know this goes back to exactly how we started the podcast, but like my dad was the best at forming a relationship with someone. He's the most reliable person. He was so loving and generous, and for me now, most of my meaning of life is just about being like my dad. It sounds really like cringe, but for me, I'm like, if I'm half the man my dad was, fuck me, I've had a good life. I can say that I'm a good man because that guy was exceptional. But thank you for tuning into the. I don't know what camera to look at. Come on, Lily. Thank you for tuning into the Stoic Athlete podcast. This is our second guest episode. Really grateful to have you on today, Ollie. We don't have a sign-off thing yet, actually, but you know what? We'll just wrap it up with a 3, 2, 1. See you in the next one.